Welcome to Lumen, a nimble new refiner.
Hello, refiners. If you're here, it's because you made the choice. Or perhaps the choice has been made for you. To delve deeper into the latest episode of Severance, Season 2, Episode 5, Trojan's Horse. So let's just get straight into it. So let's just start immediately with the first scene. We see a man in the distance rolling a metal trolley through the severed floor, whistling a little tune which we'll get into in a second. And we see he's heading towards O&D, where Felicia and this other O&D worker whose name is said to be Elizabeth are waiting for him. Now what I want to point out in this scene is notice how there's two O&D employees waiting for him, and they're both stood waiting with their hands clasped in a very polite position in front of them, okay? And notice everything about how this exchange goes with their body language and the order of steps. So they're stood there with polite hands, waiting for him to approach. They then also are waiting for him to start the conversation of saying, "Do you have them?" And it's only once he's arrived, stopped, and spoken that Elizabeth opens up the cupboard storage space, pulls open the tray, which has an array of dental instruments on. She then picks them up with both hands and hands them over to the guy with both hands. And he receives them with both hands as well. And I want to emphasize all of this non-verbal body language because I think it's very deliberate, very specific. Now, in a lot of cultures, handing things to others with both hands is showing respect, especially in like a hierarchical authority kind of sense. So this whole transaction is very respectful, I'm feeling like. And this whole handoff is also feeling a bit ceremonial or like sacred ritual type process. Like I said, the pattern is very deliberate, very specific. The waiting, acknowledging, unveiling, presenting. And then of course the receiving with two hands, saying thank you, and immediately departing. So for me, this isn't just a simple workplace exchange. This, for me, shows the undercurrent of Lumen being a religious cult type organization, even in the way in which they do these simple transactional things. Now, with the mysterious man himself, his face, his identity is obviously being concealed to us throughout this whole opening scene. And I know some people are already speculating maybe this is going to be like Bert's husband Fields that we hear about later in the episode. But at the moment, I'm not thinking like that. I'm thinking this is just a character we have yet to meet. And they're just emphasizing how there's so many layers, so many characters within Lumen that we have yet to find out about. Now, obviously, we see him using a black key card, and the members of staff who have black key cards are Mr. Milchick and Miss Huang. So clearly, whoever this guy is an upper level Lumen employee in order to have a black key card. And we then, of course, see him go into the dark corridor that we have now got a name for, which is the Exports Hall, which is obviously what Irving has been painting and the place we saw Mr. Milchick take Ms. Casey. And considering he's going into the elevator going down, I'm assuming that from the Exports Hall, where we're currently at, the dark hallway, that he is taking those dental instruments down to the testing floor. Since obviously in the first season, Ms. COBEL told Milchick to take Ms. Casey back down to the testing floor, and we see her enter this elevator going down. Now, there could be even more levels below that we don't know about, but obviously with just the information we have at the minute, it seems to just be This is the exports hall, the black corridor, which leads down to the testing floor. So now, why is this guy who looks like he's kind of wearing like a dental medical type top half of his outfit? Why is he collecting dental instruments, tools to take down to the testing floor? I'm thinking that since we later in the episode hear from Regabhi that Lumon essentially has some control over morgues and the process of acquiring supposedly dead bodies, and maybe like swapping them out, since Mark is saying, well, I thought those ashes were my wife, so who are they? I'm thinking this has something to do with like erasing, manipulating people's dental records. Because that's obvious, like that's the only kind of connection I'm making for what these dental tools could be based on the information we get. So yeah, that's just what I'm thinking, is maybe part of the testing floor is the process of, I don't know, maybe changing people like Ms. Casey's dental structure work so that if her body was ever to be, I don't know, taken out of Lumon, she would still not be able to be identified as Gemma. So maybe something like that? Not sure. Now, as I said at the top of this scene, the guy is whistling a little tune, and I'm sure you've heard other people's videos make this connection already, but the song he's whistling to is The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot. But let me promise you, I'm about to delve way deeper into this song than I think anyone else has. So I hope you stick around to hear how deep this iceberg theory within an iceberg theory goes, because I think it's all pretty crazy. So for some context, this song is about one of the worst shipwrecks in modern history. And what happened was, the Edmund Fitzgerald was this massive ship, and it was one of the largest ships that operated on the Great Lakes in North America. And on November 10th, 1975, it sank in the Lake Superior during a violent winter storm. The ship encountered 60+ mile-per-hour winds, 25-foot high waves, and freezing temperatures. It's reported that by 2:45 p.m. that day, it began to snow and the storm intensified. And at 7:10 p.m., the ship vanished from radar, sinking without a distress call. All 29 crew members aboard died, and no bodies were ever recovered. The Lake Superior where it sank is so cold at the bottom that it preserves bodies almost perfectly. And in my research on this, it's reported that at least one sailor can still be seen lying next to the shipwreck 500 feet below surface level in a life jacket. So in both the song and in real life context, it's said that this lake never gives up her dead. And with that, I'd like to just delve a little deeper into a couple of the lyrics in the song and how I think they seem to connect even further to what's going on in Lumon and just in this show. So the first lyric I want to delve into is, "The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy." Now, the obvious interpretation of this lyric is the deeper you go into this lake, the less likely you are to return. The lake never gives up her dead. And I feel like that ties into the show because it's saying Lumon is the lake. The deeper you descend, perhaps all the way down to the testing floor, the less likely you are to ever return to the outside. And I have my own theory about the testing floor and employees like Miss Casey, I think she might be a permanent innie. I don't know if she does even have her outie counterpart anymore. So I feel like these potential permanent innies are trapped at Lumon forever. And that would mirror the lake and Lumon never giving up its dead. So the next lyrics are, "The wind in the wires made a tattletale sound, and a wave broke over the railing. And every man knew, as the captain did too, 'twas the witch of November come stealing." Now, the interpretation here is obviously once the storm begins and the waves are coming through onto the boat, that's the point in which the crew knew they were going to die. And the witch of November comes stealing. It's like they're being taken to their death too soon, like come stealing. The witch of November, the cold storm, is taking their lives too soon. Now, how I think this could connect to Lumon, we know all of the water symbolism of Lumon. Water is Lumon. So with the wave breaking over the railing, this could symbolize Lumon crashing into the lives of our characters and taking them down, dragging them down to the depths, which is sealing their fate, sealing their death that they can't escape from. So we have to wonder, in the context of the storyline of the show where we're currently at, what if we're already too late? We know Mark is reintegrating in the hopes of, I guess, helping Miss Casey get out of there, but what if all of our characters are already trapped in Lumon? And then the final lyric I want to point out is, "Lake Huron Rose Superior sings in the rooms of her ice water mansion." Now obviously in this line, the lake again is being personified. It's alive, it's calling them in, it's singing. And this reminds me of the lake being like a siren. The singing is comforting, the lake is welcoming them into her home, into the rooms of her ice water mansion, into the depths below. And I think this is the crew almost accepting their fate. And the ways in which this line reminds me of Lumon is with the bit of ice water mansion. That feels so reminiscent of the Severance floor. Like the Severance floor is all white, like ice. And a mansion, it seems like a very vast floor. It seems massive. We later see in the episode, Irving has written the instructions for how to get to the exports hall. And they're insane. It's like right, left, down the hallway, left, right, you know. The floor seems massive, almost like a mansion, but bigger. The Severance floor has a replica of Keir Egan's house, almost like a mansion. Like, that house is big, considering he lived in like the late 1800s, 1900s kind of time. You could see his home replica like a mansion. And of course, like with the Severance floor as well, with it being all white, it does almost feel like it's frozen in time in this stillness, like the depths of the ocean below, because we don't have any sense of time down there. You know, they make a point to show us all the clocks. There's no numbers on any of them. They measure time in quarters. So it really does feel like this ice water mansion frozen in time. So my key takeaway with how some of these lyrics connect to Lumon, I'm thinking the deeper you go into Lumon, the less likely you are to be able to return. Now, as I mentioned with the Edmund Fitzgerald, it sank in Lake Superior, which is one of the 5 Great Lakes in North America. And in the song, it mentions 4 of the 5 Great Lakes, as this was the course the ship took, right? So the lakes that are mentioned in the song these are just the lyrics I'm quoting, are Lake Huron Rolls Superior sings in the rooms of her ice water mansion, which we went over, and farther below, Lake Ontario takes in what Lake Erie can send her. So which lake is missing from the song? The missing lake is Lake Michigan. And this is when we are now going even deeper into this iceberg theory, okay? So people have speculated that KPE, the state where Lumon and this show is taking place in, seems to be based around Michigan. And people are speculating we might be in this world's version of Michigan because of one of the K. Egan paintings that looks very similar to how the Great Lakes look in real life. So I will show you. So this painting is titled K Invites You to Drink of His Water, where it looks like he's standing over the 5 Great Lakes in North America, right? So KPE seems to equate to being Michigan. But what does this mean? Well, be prepared to delve even deeper, okay? Now, with these 5 Great Lakes, I started thinking, what does this sound like? What is this reminding me of? And I began thinking about the 5 rivers of the underworld in Greek mythology. So let me give you a brief rundown of what the 5 rivers of the underworld in Greek mythology are. Okay, so first, as you go through the entrance to the underworld, we have the river Styx, which is the river of oaths and unbreakable contracts. Now, I think this represents the severance procedure itself, how once you cross the threshold of being severed, of having the severance chip, you cannot undo it, right? We hear that the procedure is irreversible, and once that chip's in your head, it's there forever. That, like, you can't remove it. So it's a contract, it's a bond, it's a one-way trip, and that's exactly how the river Styx, being the entrance to the underworld, is, because once you cross into the underworld, you then can't return to Earth, to your mortal life. It's a one-way trip, just like getting severed is. Then next, we have the River Akron, which is the river of pain or woe. Where have we heard that word before? And I think this represents being a severed worker on the severed floor, because they're trapped in endless suffering without knowing why. They exist in a state of confusion, despair, isolation, and it's just being trapped in this river of woe, of pain. Then we have the river Lethe, which is the river of forgetfulness, and this is where spirits drink from in order to erase and forget their mortal earth lives. And I think this represents the process of being severed itself, right? Like, their memories of their outside life, their mortal earthly life, are erased. They forget who they are, who they were, where they came from, all their memories. And I think this ties directly into the Keir painting we just spoke about. So again, this Keir painting is titled Keir Invites You to Drink of His Water. I think this is talking about he is inviting you to drink from the river Lethe. The severed workers obviously forget who they were on the outside world. He's inviting you, severed workers, to erase yourselves before the process of reincarnation, of being a severed worker. And then we move on to the river Phlegethon, which is known as the river of fire or flames. And I'm thinking this might represent the testing floor, because I'm thinking the testing floor is probably the place where people's identities are burned away, reshaped, destroyed. and the people who are trapped down there are forced into some sort of submission we haven't seen yet. And I think the testing floor is going to be a lot darker than anything else we've already seen in the show. Like, I'm just getting this really ominous vibe that whatever is really happening down there is going to be some really crazy bad stuff. And whatever it is, I think could be linked to it being like a river of fire, of flames. But obviously we'll have to wait and see how that pans out. And then finally we have the river Cocytus, which is the river of wailing. And it's a place full of sorrow, grief, hopelessness. And I'm thinking this is the river we're currently on. I'm thinking the journey our characters are on, the way the story is being told, I think we're following the river of wailing. I've heard the creator of the show, Dan Erickson, or maybe it was Ben Stiller, say that Mark's grief is almost like the North Star of the whole show. So like, we have to think everything kind of comes back to how this man is handling grief. And grief is a key word connected to the river of wailing, right? So at this point, I'm thinking Care PE equals Michigan, which equals the river Cocytus. Now, in my previous video, I went into my theory that I think we're following the journey of Dante's descent through the 9 circles of hell, with us eventually ending up in the 9th circle, which is represented as a frozen lake. And in my last video, I explored all of the imagery and symbolism that I think supports this theory. Like, there's so much like winter, snow, ice, frozen water, white, blue imagery. Just, it's the whole show, basically. And I briefly explained how I think season 1 ties into the first circle, which is limbo. Season 2, thematically, story-wise, seems to be following the second circle of lust. And with that, the punishment for lust is an eternal storm where souls are trapped there while being violently thrown about in this storm, never able to find rest, how they're just caught in this chaotic wind and they're powerless against it. And this again reminds me of what actually happened to the ship, the Edmund Fitzgerald. It sank due to a violent winter storm. The wind intensified, the waves grew stronger, the snow started falling. The ship was swallowed by the lake, dragging the crew into the freezing depths. So I don't think this is just historical coincidence within the show. I think this all fits into the themes and the symbolism of what we are exploring in the show. Now, in my last video, when I was going through this whole theory, I skipped down to the 9th circle to try to get an understanding of where this show might be heading. And as I said, the 9th circle is represented as a frozen lake. And its name is also Cocytus, which was obviously taken from the river Cocytus in Greek mythology. So now I'm thinking, what if we're in the river of wailing, we're in the river Cocytus, and it's taking us down to the 9th circle, to the frozen lake of hell? Or what if the river of wailing, the river Cocytus, ends up freezing over to turn into the frozen lake of hell Cocytus, right? So now I'm making all of these connections between what really happened with the Edmund Fitzgerald and what's happening in the show on like these deeper symbolic layers. And something else that stuck out to me is that the Lake Superior where the ship sank, it actually is like the perfect place to preserve bodies. So the water is so cold down there that bacteria can't thrive. And that means bodies that end up there don't decay. They're essentially frozen in time. And that's why one of the sailors is still down there with a life jacket on, looking nearly untouched after decades. And this got me thinking, this reminds me of something that's said in the Lumon MDR Orientation Handbook, which says employees must wash their hands at least 10 times per day, before and after eating, before and after using the facilities, and when coming into contact with a co-worker. And I'm wondering, why do they have to follow such strict hygiene protocols and maintain this like purified, controlled environment? So I'm now wondering, what if Lumon is intentionally creating the same kind of preservation environment like the depths of the Great Lakes? Like, what if they're creating an environment maybe down on the testing floor where decay doesn't happen? The bodies can be preserved indefinitely, which obviously fits in to, again, all of this frozen ice symbolism stuff. And of course, there's a lot of theories that maybe they are keeping bodies in some sort of cold storage, frozen type thing in order to maybe recreate members of the Eagan family, maybe even Kir Eagan himself. And I think there's definitely something like that happening. Like with this connection to them seemingly maybe creating a similar preservation type environment that's like the bottom of the Great Lakes, it would make sense that they can essentially keep human bodies in some sort of cold storage. And here's just one final little Easter egg cherry on top of this kind of iceberg theory within an iceberg theory that I've delved into. So on Lumon's LinkedIn page, which anyone can access, they made a post 3 weeks ago that says, "Felicitations are in order for this quarter's Wintertide Fellow, Ms. Huang. Her green outlook is precisely what Lumon aims to cultivate as an organization. She will be invaluable on our severed floor." Now I'm thinking, Wintertide Fellow? Like winter as in frozen ice and tide as in flowing water like a river? Like, it's kind of saying she's a follower of an ice river, of the frozen lake of hell, maybe? Now, my personal theory about what's the deal with Miss Huang, why is she a child on the severed floor in a management position? I think that she is from the Myrtle Egan School for Girls. I think it's an orphanage, the same place that Ms. COBEL went to. And I think this is just how this side of Lumon, of the Egan family, operate. I think they take in, obviously, like the orphan children of people who died in quotation marks, and they raise them in this kind of religious cult setting of Lumon, of Kir Eagan, and they're basically creating the perfect, most loyal workers. I mean, we've seen how Ms. COBEL was, at least, where Helena says in episode 2 of season 2, like, and yet still you proved your loyalty tonight, because it's like she was fired. She didn't have to race to the gala to try to prevent what Helly was getting up to. But of course she did it because she is a loyal follower. And that's the exact kind of indoctrinated children raised in this system type of loyalty that's going to be pretty much invaluable. Like, look at the contrast between Ms. Huang and Milchick. Milchick is definitely not one of these disciples of Keir Egan. He definitely is not involved in following the religious cult aspects of the company, whereas employees like Ms. COBEL and now Ms. Huang are deemed as like perfectionists in comparison. And that's also why I think she was making those anonymous complaints against Milchick about him using too many big words, and putting the paper clips on backwards, because she's been raised to follow the teachings, the rules exactly as they are, and not to question anything, not to stray from the path. And she's a child, so she hasn't been exposed to the world. She hasn't been exposed to other points of view to know any different. She's obviously just going to do what she's told so that she doesn't get in trouble. And being one of these true disciples of Keir Egan of Lumon, I feel like her being called a Wintertide fellow is kind of like saying she is the type of employee that's going to make sure maybe the lake stays frozen, the severed people remain trapped in hell. Like, it's the enforcer of this frozen hell symbolism stuff. And since I just mentioned Miss COBEL, I would just like to say, where is she? Where is Miss COBEL? Where is Gamora? I think her presence is sorely missed in this season so far. We're now halfway through the season, we've just finished episode 5, and we've only seen her in 2 episodes. And even in those 2 episodes, we barely saw her. Now, I know she's obviously going to return in some future episodes, because I've seen from like the teaser promotional material, there's a couple of lines and shots we haven't seen of her yet. But by this point in the season, I did think she would have more presence than what she currently has. Obviously, I don't know what's going to happen with her character now that she's essentially decided to go on her own and not return to Lumon. But I feel like unless she can team up with other like-minded people like her, who are still kind of like loyal Keir Egan followers, I feel like she might end up just going back to Lumon in some capacity. Because she does seem really invested in whatever Cold Harbour is, at least whatever's happening with Mark and Gemma and her own little side quest of trying to get them to remember each other, have this memory bleed stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to say I feel like her presence is definitely missed, and it's very noticeable that someone that brings such weight to the show is missing from it, I think. But anyway, let's get back to going through this episode, because I know it's pretty crazy that I was able to do such a deep dive iceberg theory just from the opening like 2-minute scene of a man whistling a little tune. But hopefully that's the kind of deep dive theory crafting analysis that you are here for. So I hope you appreciate it. Now, I think there's a few key lines to point out in this scene between Helena, Natalie, and Mr. Drummond. So we open with Helena saying that her father should hear it from her, and I think it's safe to assume we're talking about Irving trying to drown her here. But then when Mr. Drummond says, we have decided to spare him knowledge of this, I'm thinking, who is the we? Is the we him and Natalie? Or is the we him, Natalie, and the board? Because I was thinking James Egan was a part of the board. So are we saying that the board has decided not to tell James Eagan, the CEO, of what happened to his own daughter? Or is this a decision just between Natalie and Mr. Drummond? So the question is obviously, who is the we here? So Helena's response is, well, please let him know that his daughter is alive and well. So for me, this is confirming we're definitely talking about Irving trying to drown her. But then when we skip to the bit of dialogue where Mr. Drummond and Natalie are forcing Helena to go back down as Helly, she says, and father approves, and Mr. Drummond says, father encouraged it. So how is her father able to encourage her to return to MDR as Helly and is encouraging it, right? But yet he doesn't know about the drowning. So is he maybe just agreeing that she has to go back as her innie self instead? It's interesting to see how even people higher up in Lumon are concealing knowledge from even James Eagan, the CEO, but how he's still enforcing decisions like Helly returning to work on the severed floor, right? And with the usage of the word father from Mr. Drummond, this is again giving me very religious cult type vibes. I'm wondering if, in the Kate Eagan religious cult sense, I'm wondering if the term father is like what it is in like Catholicism, of like having the father, a priest. So I wonder if in the religious sense of Lumon, if James Eagan is some kind of priest, a father of his disciples. Because I don't think Mr. Drummond is a part of the Eagan family. So why would he be saying father encouraged it? And with this kind of revelation, I guess, that James Eagan isn't going to be told about the Helena drowning situation, it makes me think that maybe he also is just like a figurehead in this company, and that the board actually has even like total control, like even over him, even though he is the CEO and he is an Eagan. So it obviously adds to the whole mystery of who is the board, what is the board. And I wrote in my notes about the board kind of like operating from the shadows, and when I wrote that, it made me think of the Wizard of Oz and how maybe it's all just smoke and mirrors, and the board, you know, whatever the reveal of the board's going to be, if we even ever get one, maybe it is this kind of Wizard of Oz kind of fake out thing where it's not going to be as mysterious as it's kind of currently presented as. And with this Wizard of Oz connection as well, I was reminded of this Reddit post I saw where someone said this scene from season 1 of the MDR workers reminded them of the Wizard of Oz. So I do wonder if there's going to be any more connections to this man behind the curtain, who is the board mystery stuff. But let me just go back in this scene for a second, because there's a couple more interesting details we get. So Mr. Drummond says, the medical team says your tempers will rebalance quickly. So this is confirming to us that part of Lumon's ideology, like they do follow this whole taming of tempers, rebalancing stuff. Now, bringing up Ms. COBEL again, I saw a theory where someone said, before the Severance chip, what if Kate Eagan saying about taming the tempers was a way to just train your own mind before the Severance chip was obviously invented to create these split consciousnesses? So like the old ways of taming your tempers is just like some super like mind control stuff, and maybe Ms. COBEL is one of these tamed tempers person in like the old ways. So this saying like your tempers will rebalance quickly, I'm thinking the teachings of Keir Egan in this religious sense is connected to that theory. I think I'm also on board with that theory of the taming of the tempers in the old way being just like, you know, controlling your own mind kind of stuff. And when he says, perhaps we could arrange another obligement session this evening, I'm thinking, again, this is very like religious type stuff, like obligement session. I bet this is like a way in which they have to go and work on balancing out their tempers in this controlled environment, maybe punishment kind of way, because we see Helena's reaction is like shutting it down, like, I said I'm fine, like I don't need to do that kind of vibes. And this scene is also interesting because we see Natalie and Mr. Drummond having control over Helena Egan, which I think is pretty crazy, actually. It means that whatever positions Natalie and Mr. Drummond have are obviously super close to the board and are actually ranked higher than Helena Egan. And also seemingly Jamie Egan, since they can hide knowledge from him of what happened to his own daughter. And then also this line when Helena says they're fucking animals. Her delivery of this line, her facial expression, her vibe, I'm inclined to believe that this is her stance. And she's not just saying it to present this persona she has at work, at Lumon, as being an Egan. But then obviously we know she slept with Innie Mark. So what is this contradiction? Like, I'm kind of believing her having this stance of saying they're fucking animals, like they tried to kill me. But yet she was not only fine sleeping with Mark, but also we later see a scene in this episode where she's watching Mark leave work. So she's clearly still into him. So I'm not really sure what's going on with her character. Of course, this could all just be an act, her saying they're fucking animals, but I believe it. I believe how she's presenting this, how she's saying this. And speaking of Mark, I just wanted to touch on the kind of attitude and behavior we saw of Innie Mark in this episode. So obviously at first we see the scene in the bathroom, which obviously mirrors the scene in the bathroom from the first season where Helly's drawing the message on her arms and Mark just comes in. But obviously in this scene, Mark is just unwilling to engage in conversation with Helly and just shuts it down, like saying it doesn't matter. And it's really sad how she's like, don't you want to know what happened to me? And he's just like, no, I don't. Let's just try to forget it. Okay. And then leaves. And you may be thinking like, well, why is he acting like this? But all of his behavior, I think, is just showing how Mark, whether it's his innie or outie, processes grief or trauma. Like we've seen with outie Mark, with losing his wife and getting severed, Mark doesn't know how to process these kind of heavy feelings and things he goes through. He just kind of suppresses it. And again, this later scene where Mark's going to leave Irving's funeral and he's like, I gotta get to work, but great ceremony, guys. And Helly's obviously confronting him. She says, Irving was your friend and he's dead. And this scene mirrors in season 1 when Helly finds the map Petey drew and her and Mark are having like the standoff confrontation. And she says, your friend drew this for you and you don't give a shit. And Mark is like, you know what? You're right. I don't give a shit. And then he shreds it, right? Because again, his default coping mechanism for things that are like traumatic for him is to just shut it all down, doesn't want to engage. That's it. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Like, Helly's literally saying exactly what she said in the first season about PD's map. Like, you just don't give a shit. Like, how don't you give a shit? We're like replaying things. And it's obviously because for Mark, he thought he was falling for Helly, which obviously turned out to be her outie, Helena. And it's obviously super messed up that she slept with him by pretending to be her innie self. So you just have to imagine what Mark's going through. He must feel so violated and also like embarrassed because, as Helly says, like, didn't you know, she wasn't me and stuff? And he's like, obviously I didn't, because she's just like you, but now I don't even think I know who you are actually. He's obviously going to feel violated, embarrassed. And how is he coping with that? He's just shutting down. And now we're obviously also presented with yet another morality, ethical question. So we know that outie Mark has begun the process of reintegration, but his innie doesn't know that. And his innie is probably also going to feel violated that he didn't have a say or a choice in this decision either. Especially in this moment where he's obviously just now full of like grief and trauma and just suppressing it all. To then have your outie self trying to find Gemma, Ms. Casey, to get her out of there. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see if, how, and when Mark's innie begins to maybe realize that he's in the process of reintegration, and how that's also going to affect his attitude and behavior at work. And as we're talking about reintegration, I want to touch on some of the things Regabhi has told us in this episode and how it fits into the current landscape of everything we know so far. So in this scene, Mark asks, are they hurting her? And Regabhi says, I don't know, right? So this is showing her knowledge of Lumon also has its limits, and it seems to be limited to being down to the severed floor. So she doesn't seem to have knowledge about the testing floor, otherwise she would know if they're hurting Gemma down there. So what does she know? Let's examine what she has shared with us. What is her intel, information, knowledge sources? In an earlier episode, she said to Mark in episode 3, she said Gemma was alive the last time she saw her. We don't know obviously when that was, but we know Regabhi had to be in Lumon to see Gemma. Or maybe she just saw her through like a CCTV camera or something. But that means she must have seen Gemma outside of the testing floor, since she doesn't know if they're hurting her down there. We also know that she was the one who implanted the Severance chip into Mark's head, because she says that in season 1. She's like, I'm the one that put that chip in your head, and I'm the only one who can. I don't know the wording she used, because she couldn't have said take it out, because they don't do that. But she definitely said she was the one that put the chip in his head. And then when Grainer has PD's chip examined, he tells COBEL that it's traceable to them, to Lumon, and that he thinks it's traceable to Regabhi. And this is interesting because I'm wondering if maybe the process of reintegration has changed, because we saw her just using like metal instruments, radio wave, brainwave stuff to start reintegrating Mark. But if she did that to PD, how is it traceable to her? And we also know in episode 3 of this season, she also says to Mark she heard about the OTC. So if she's obviously got like an insider connection to Lumon still, because I don't think she obviously works there anymore. I mean, she's hiding out in Mark's basement, so she can't work there anymore. But whoever her source is on the inside definitely has security clearance down to at least the 7th floor to know about the OTC. And with all of the knowledge she's shared with us so far about like what she knows about Lumon, it's making me think of her saying to Mark again this season, episode 3, where she says there's only one way to get information in and out of Lumon, and that's reintegration. So a lot of people are speculating, like, what's Regabhi up to? What's her goal here? I feel like the getting information in and out is her key goal, because that's what she like opens the idea of reintegration to Mark with. I do think she probably has some like moral, ethical reasons as well. Like she probably does feel bad for her part in implanting the severance chips into people. Like she probably feels like she's crossed her own like moral, ethical lines with playing a part in Lumon's whole stuff. But it really stuck out to me that that's like the key way she presents reintegration to Mark, is it being the only way to get information in and out, which also is interesting, right? Because that's not entirely true, because she still has a source in Lumon. So she's able to still receive information of what happens down there, like with the OTC. Just a lot of questions, right? Just a lot of pieces that I'm trying to put together with Regabhi and how far her intel knowledge of Lumon goes and what her motives are in this. And as I'm talking about Regabhi's goal maybe just being to reintegrate people for maybe information in and out of Lumon purposes, I want to briefly touch on Irving. So in this episode, we see Irving making a call from a payphone again. And he says, "It's me again. So they fired me. I think they knew what my innie was up to. I'm telling you to..." And it gets cut off and we don't know what the end of that sentence was. Now, he's definitely not reintegrated, right? Because he would know what actually happened with his innie, etc. And I'm thinking he might be working with another person, another type of group or organization than Regabhi. Because if Regabhi's whole thing is about reintegration, and Irving was trying to pass a message through to his innie, then she could have just done what she did with Mark and say, well, I can just reintegrate you and then your innie will get the message and go and find it. But instead, like, the way that Regabhi and Irving seem to be tackling the infiltration of Lumon seems to be coming from, like, different places. Like, different methods, basically. And I actually think this will be really interesting to find out that there is like another group separate from Regabhi that are trying to maybe figure out what's going on at Lumon, because for some reason, Outie Irving knows what the exports hall looks like. But how? How does he know what it looks like? And why does he want his innie to go there? Like, what is there? What is down the elevator to the testing floor? What's down there? What does he want his innie to uncover? And how does he know that he should be, like, staying awake in season 1, listening to loud music, drinking coffee, and painting, hoping to like memory bleed it through to his innie. Like, how would he know all of that stuff? And that's obviously, again, not the same kind of process Regabhi's taking with like PD and Mark. So I just find this really interesting, actually, and I'm really excited to get more information about Irving's objectives, because I really think they are separate to Regabhi. And as I'm talking about Irving, I have to say I love that Irving left extremely detailed instructions on the back of his drawing of the exports hall, and that Dylan obviously found it. Because I think obviously either our whole little MDR team of Dylan, Helly and Mark might end up going there together, maybe just one of them, two of them. Either way, I think we're definitely going to see at least one of them head down there. But it's that thing, right? They need one of the black key cards in order to open it, to get into the hallway. So that's going to be interesting to see how we eventually maybe get there. And of course, as I just mentioned with Regabhi, the testing floor seems like an even more secretive place, since Regabhi doesn't seem to have any intel on it. But the question, right, is how are we going to get to the testing floor? So let me circle back to the things I mentioned earlier in this video about the 5 rivers of the underworld. In this Greek mythology, souls don't just appear in the underworld. They have to travel through it. They have to cross the 5 rivers. And if my theory is correct, then the river Phlegathon, the river of fire, being the testing floor, this means our innies, our characters, are going to have to... This would mean the characters are going to have to follow wherever this river of fire takes them. And if we are going to be following these rivers, then they have to be leading somewhere. And I think that's where Cold Harbor might come into it. Now, what are the things that I explored in this video? We looked at the 5 Great Lakes and how they're vast and can be inescapable, swallowing those who delve too deep. We looked at how this may connect to the 5 rivers of the underworld, carrying lost souls through suffering towards their final destination. And we have the testing floor, a place where maybe identities are erased, maybe where consciousness is altered. And we also have the possible connection to us ending up in the 9th circle of hell of the frozen lake. So I'm now wondering if the frozen lake of hell might be Cold Harbor. A harbor is supposed to be a place of rest, of safety, a final stop after a long journey. But what if Cold Harbor is the moment where you're at a place of rest and you've stopped because you can't move because the lake has frozen? So we have to wonder what Cold Harbor is and why Lumon is so desperate for Mark to complete it. Because if Lumon's goal was just about control, they already have that. If it was just about obedience, they already enforce that. If it was just about the severance procedure, they've already perfected that. Well, mostly. So what is Cold Harbor that Lumon hasn't achieved yet? And if Cold Harbor is connected to being like a frozen lake, what happens when it's complete? What happens when the lake freezes over? What does this mean? My current thoughts on it might be them perfecting a way to permanently tame those who are permanent innies. So like I said earlier, I suspect Miss Casey might be a permanent innie. And I don't think they have an outie counterpart anymore, or any access to it. But even with Ms. Casey being a permanent innie, a permanent severed employee at Lumon, we've already seen in season 1 that she wasn't fully refined. We saw that she still had moments of independence and personal autonomy. There were those scenes where she told Irving that Bert was waiting for him in the meeting room. That's something she didn't have to tell him, and probably shouldn't have told him. But that's showing she still has some personality in there. And she told Mark that watching Helly in MDR for 8 hours was something like the most enjoyable experience of her 107 hours of existence. And again, that's another thing she didn't have to say. She probably shouldn't have said. But it's showing us she still has some human personal qualities about her down within her somewhere. There's still some ability to think, feel, and process experiences in a personal way. So I think this showed she wasn't completely tamed, and that's why Ms. COBEL sent her back down to the testing floor. So I'm wondering if the completion of Cold Harbor, which we are suspecting is working on refining the severance chip within Gemma, within Ms. Casey, since we saw at the end of episode 1 of season 2, the screen flashed up with an image of Gemma's face. So if Mark is working on refining her chip, this might be the final iteration needed to have a fully tamed permanent innie. Because you then have an employee who is completely subservient. There's not a single ounce of self-will or stray thoughts or emotional response. It's all just pure obedience. And this would be the perfectly 4 tempers tamed employee. And with this, Lumon wouldn't just have obedient workers. They'd also have complete control over the physical human body of these people. So do we really think Lumon would just stop at using them for working purposes? What's gonna stop them from using these bodies for something else? And I haven't fully delved much into this theory, but right now as I'm recording this, I'm currently thinking if they're able to have complete control over a human body because they've fully tamed the brain through the severance chip, I'm thinking it might be some sort of maybe using these bodies, these innie-only bodies, as vessels to store other consciousnesses, for the Eagan family, for example, because this would immortalize the Eagan family and they would live forever into perpetuity. Because if they can somehow make sure these permanent innies don't have any access to their outie self, to that part of the brain, you're then left with this human physical vessel. And maybe with the severance chip, you can implant a different outie consciousness to replace the one you've blocked off. And then it would be a situation where if the Eagans have been able to store their consciousnesses somewhere in some sort of computer system thing, they can then just be implanted into one of these innie-only bodies and exist in the world. And this is why it's important we loop back to the beginning scene with the dental instruments. This is why it would make sense that they need to make sure, for example, Gemma's dental record stuff wouldn't link to her, because then a past Eagan could inhibit Gemma's body and just go out and live their life in the world. And if anything did happen to the body, they're not going to link it back to Gemma because they've changed the dental record, like the actual teeth in the person. And this could also potentially be part of like the revolving thing, a revolving door, a revolving of bodies. This would literally be a way for the Eagans to live forever. And obviously the human body of the innie-only person's not going to resist this outer consciousness inhabiting their brain and their body because maybe of the Cold Harbor stuff that Mark's doing. Like, once you fully tame the tempers in an innie-only chip in someone's, like, brain, they lose all control, all connection to who they used to be, and you're just left with this innie-only, perfect tamed worker, almost robot-like vessel. But I definitely need to spend some more time cooking up that little theory and seeing if it will all make sense and everything. So I'm just gonna leave it there for now. But anyway, those were just all of my thoughts and theories about the latest episode of Severance. But let me know what you think. Do you agree with the things I shared in this video? Do you disagree? What theories are you currently cooking up? Whatever thoughts you have, just let me know in the comments below. And be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, as it helps the algorithm know you want to see more content like this as I continue covering this season and beyond. And to those of you who have already subscribed, we're already at nearly 100 subscribers, which is crazy. I really didn't expect this after just making one video, so I really appreciate everyone who has already subscribed, and I'm really glad that other people are enjoying these deeper dives into the show. Like, it's just been great seeing so many of you just as invested in Severance as I am and wanting to go down these theory icebergs with me. But now, if you've made it to the end of this video, congratulations! You have now reached 100% on your file. A handshake is available upon request. And remember,
I love you, but now I must away, for there are others who need me around the world. Goodbye.